the second part of the state capture report, has recommended an investigation against Denel board members who allegedly appointed people who facilitated looting at the state arms manufacturer. Now, the Presidency received the report just yesterday. It focuses on how Denel and Transnet were captured. Today, Denel struggling to pay its employees who have approached the courts to force the SOE to pay outstanding salaries. Newzroom Afrika's senior reporter, Tumaole, was at the Union Buildings yesterday, and he joins us for more on the reporters on the other desk this morning. But it's that 500-page report, and then there's volume 2 of part 2 of the report as well. Right. There's a lot of focus, Tumaole, on what unfolded at Denel. And as you told us a little earlier, it also takes us back to not only the board-level shenanigans, but ministerially as well.
Yes, of course, with the name of Lynn Brown, who was a public enterprises minister at the time, certainly receiving something of a disparaging assessment in terms of the report's findings and recommendations. Lynn Brown saying at the time when she came before the Zondo Commission of Inquiry that she was not a Gupta stooge, and that she actually was hurt by the reports that came out in the media around 2015 when all these shenanigans were happening at the Denel board. Now, there seemed to have been a formula at the public enterprises, not only at Denel, when you see how it was basically gutted and basically, toppled from its once shining status as one of the best SOEs in the world.
Sure.
To what it is currently now, where, with employees having to go to court to try and get salaries that are due to them. Now, what's very hurtful about this particular process, Michelle, is that these employees are people who are vested and people who are patriots and people who want to see the best of Denel. What happened around that time, as far as Brown's involvement and others, is that you found a situation where senior executives who were pushing back against contracts that were questionable in terms of both the figures and in terms of how they were reached without a tendering process that was brought out. Those executives were then suspended, offered golden handshakes and pushed aside, and then Denel entered into contracts that were initially flagged anyway without those executives being in place. And these are positions of a CFO, positions of a CEO, and so those are critical positions, and one answers how those contracts were entered into without them. So certainly when you find who the players were, VR Laser, a company linked to Gupta enforcer Salim Essa, and that was for acquisition of hulls and other key components in the manufacturing process that Denel is involved in the East.
So as you say, there was a program of action for the looting of SOEs. Yes. And this program of action was implemented according to the State Capture Inquiry report, not only at Denel, but it was the same program, some version of that program, which was implemented, as you say, bringing in particular people who were aligned with the Guptas, very strange sign-offs with the likes of Lynn Brown, the former Public Enterprises Minister, Malusi Kigaba, also mentioned very heavily there insofar as Transnet is concerned. Let's talk a bit more about Denel, because Daniel Mancha is another person who's named in the report. Mancha's appointment at the very start is questioned by the Acting Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo, because he himself had a bit of a checkered past as an attorney. In fact, he'd been struck off the roll of attorneys, and here he was being appointed not only to the board of an SOE, but to chair of the board. Yes,
to chair of the board. And the question around that is why someone like that would be given such a critical position, as you have alluded to, and what the report's findings, and certainly what was the narrative during the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, was Mancha's appointment really someone who would facilitate and fast-track a process that would lead to the capture of the Denel. And of course we saw with evidence given before the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, he actually instituted the process whereby the executives who were in charge of protecting the finances and ensuring the processes when it came to the acquisition of deals and financial transactions with Denel.
And actually these were top-performing executives. There was nothing wrong with what they were doing.
They had no reason. Yes, they had no reason. There were no charges and no grounds effectively for disciplinary processes to be instituted. But the process that was followed by Mancha and others within Denel and around Denel was basically a hounding out, where these executives were, they testified before the Zondo Commission, effectively had their backs against the wall to say, look, either you take effectively a golden handshake, you are out anyway, because the working conditions have become so bad that some of them even went into states of depression because they could not find any recourse. It seemed as if the whole, Denel board had turned against them. But Mancha was instrumental to say to them, here's a golden handshake. There's no other way out.
In fact, the people you're talking about, Denel's chief executive officer at the time, Riaz Saluji,
yes,
who performed so excellently, according to the report. The former board intended for Saluji's term actually to be extended because his performance was of such a high caliber. The newly appointed board, though, led by Daniel Mancha, suspending him and 2 other people as well.
Yes, 2 other people would be Chief Financial Officer Fikile Mhlonto as well as Company Secretary Elizabeth Afrika. And so this is where the question of how Lynn Brown executed her oversight role. She had basically said that she did not want to be seen to be overreaching as a minister and involving herself in effectively board politics and how the board was run, because that would go against the scope of her responsibility as minister. However, both Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo and the evidence leaders at the Commission of Inquiry were very firm in pushing to say that the oversight role that you're meant to play as minister is something that is very specifically laid out in the PFMA. Therefore, you cannot absolve yourself of responsibility, and that would be tantamount to you then basically facilitating the process of state capture, because the buck would stop with the minister at the time. This is why Lynn Brown's name is so central to all of these shenanigans.
In fact, a lot said about her testimony at the state capture inquiry as well, and her apparent inability to remember telephone calls that she had with Salim Essa. A reminder for our viewers, Salim Essa, we refer to him in the media as a known Gupta associate. Yes. He and others getting around 7.3 billion rands worth of alleged kickbacks received by his companies and companies linked to the Guptas, allegedly through dealings with Transnet. This is who Salim Essa is. It's the same person that Lynn Brown told the state capture inquiry when she was on the stand. She did not remember having any kind of telephone calls with this person, Salim Essa.
Yes.
In fact, she said she had never spoken to him. The state capture inquiry saying they've got telephone records showing that she had a total of 8 conversations with whoever the person was who was using Salim Essa's phone. Those phone calls varying in duration, but one of them with a duration of 1,400 seconds, around 23 minutes. Yes,
around 23 minutes, and therefore that throws pours cold water on the argument of amnesia that Lynn Brown brought forward. And not only amnesia over the telephone calls, Michelle, there were also witnesses who placed Salim Essa within proximity of Lynn Brown and certain particular meetings that were being held relating to the SOEs at Transnet's facilities, and also in other venues that Lynn Brown also, before the Commission of Inquiry, said she did not necessarily remember bumping into Salim Essa.
Because what was he doing there?
He had no business being there at all. He was being touted as a consultant. He was being touted as an advisor. However, there was no paper trail that effectively linked him in any capacity, except to say that he was playing more of an enforcer role, more of a watchdog role, to lean on certain players that have denied being linked to the Guptas. However, Salim Essa must have been one of the luckiest men in history, because he seemed to find himself at particularly meetings and venues that the general public would not necessarily have had any wind of, and yet he was there and no one could tell why he was there, and he was also contributing and also making suggestions and making inputs to meetings. Some executives have also testified before the Zondo Commission of Inquiry and other streams of evidence saying that they had no idea who this person was and what he was doing there. I think specifically to a stream of evidence linked to the diamond mining in terms of how Transnet was moving diamonds that were mined in the sea. This was in the Western Cape towards the Port Elizabeth side of things. Diamonds would be mined by fishermen, and then they would then be placed on trains and sold off internationally. That was then scuppered. People lost their jobs. We follow another pattern there where, of course, when it comes to that particular SOE, again, you have executives that are suspended.
Yep.
And this was an SOE that Lynn Brown and subsequently Malusi Gigaba would be overseeing. The same formula used there again, Michelle.
In fact, we've talked quite heavily this morning, thanks for that, Tumaole Mhlaudi, about Lynn Brown and the Denel saga. Of course, she's not the only person named in Part 2 of the State Capture Inquiry report. The likes of, as Tumaole Mhlaudi has just told it, Malusi Gigaba in his capacity as the former Public Enterprises Minister, Brian Molefe for his time at Transnet, Anuj Singh is also named there, along with Siyabonga Gama. Of course, we're still making our way through that 500-odd page second part of the State Capture Inquiry report, and we'll continue to unpack it for you right here on the channel.